Welcome. If you are signing on now for the second time, I'm glad you're here. Sorry about that. I had some technical difficulties. Um, I am Sarah Casada, and let me see. Oh, I'm having a guest join us, and let me make sure. Let me just reply to her so that she can participate with us because I'm very excited for you guys to meet Catherine. She actually is the author of our Far From Home Exploring Migration Stories in the Bible, which is the Bible study that we just released this week. So she authored that study. She also had a book come out this week. So I'm really excited for you guys to meet her and to hear a little bit of her heart behind the words that she put together for us in this study. And so, yes, welcome, welcome. Glad you guys are joining live. And yeah, if you popped on earlier, I sleep with headphones, so my phone was still connected to all of that, which sort of messed up my situation. So I'm gonna bring Catherine in here, and we'll see if we can get this to work this time. Hey, welcome, welcome.
Hey, there we go.
Awesome. I can hear you now. Thanks for your flexibility. And let me just say to those watching, if I didn't say it just yet, if you haven't gotten Far From Home yet, it is free on our website and you can download it there. So I recommend it highly. And I'm so excited, Catherine, for you to join us because you worked really hard on creating this content and doing this research.
Yeah, well, I loved it. And I'm so great to hang out with you, Sarah, and everyone else at Women of Welcome. Hey guys.
Yes, absolutely. So let me ask you a question so that we can get to know you a little bit better and kind of hear some of your heart for writing this particular Bible study. So what got you interested or intrigued by this topic of welcoming and migration in the Bible and immigrants and refugees?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of things I think in my life that kind of are touch points with this topic. I personally, as a kid, moved around all the time and never really had a sense of home. And so I think I'm probably just drawn to those stories anyway. Um, but right now, where my husband and I and our kids have lived for over 10 years is a community that is almost 50% first or second degree, first or second generation immigrants or refugees or migrants of some sort that were not, either they or their parents weren't born here, but they live here now, and we've all built a community together. And so those stories are important to me because they're people, they're my friends, they're my neighbors. My husband is also the director of a community-based ministry that really tries to be welcoming to not just in a charitable sense, but in a neighborly brother and sister in Christ kind of sense to the newcomers in our community. So that being a part of that has impacted our entire family in every possible way, from what church looks like to what school looks like for my kids. So these kinds of stories have woven their way into every aspect of our family and our life in this neighborhood. And more recently, as you mentioned, I wrote this book, Fearing Bravely. It launched the same day as this Bible study, so that was kind of fun. But the subtitle is Risking Love for Our Neighbors, Strangers, and Enemies. And so in my case, both neighbors often, but definitely strangers, fit into this this category of people on the move. So I've spent a lot of time kind of digging into what the Bible has to say about that and what that can look like for a Christian community to take Jesus seriously when he says to welcome the stranger.
Yeah, it's so interesting once you start asking those questions and thinking about those concepts. It feels almost impossible to not see it when you're reading the Bible and recognizing that. And of course, you know, sometimes we're talking about people groups that were more nomadic than maybe what many of us are today, but there's also so much that we can recognize in those stories of migration that we do see happening today, either in our own lives or in our neighbors or in our country neighbors of people that are on the move and migrating. And so it's really, I think, such a I've always really loved, we've done several character type studies for Welcome. We did one with Ruth and Naomi, really looking at their story and their migration story. And then last year we launched Bold and Brave, which was focused on the story of the women of Exodus who helped rescue Moses. And then, so this is kind of, the next one is sort of that character study series, really looking at the Bible with kind of a bird's eye lens of there's a theme of migration that we can learn from here, which I think is, it's just really, I love that. I love being able to kind of dive into the Bible in those ways. So I'd love to hear from you what kind of, as you were writing this study, was there something that you learned from your research that you didn't know before or that surprised you as you were kind of walking through this study?
Well, for sure. As a writer, I think the way I learn is by like I'm the fortunate one because readers will just, read a thing, but I've been reading it for months, so I am so formed by the things that I write and research and study. But I do think that you touched on it a second ago. It's just how prevalent migration has always been throughout all of human history, and certainly throughout the Bible. And I think maybe today we think of it as, like an exception. Maybe like in a particular moment there would be people on the move. But what really blew me away is how the human story has been a story of migration, and the biblical story is a story of people on the move, and God's redemption story. So many of the key pivotal moments of God's work in the world have been times when people were far, far from home, far from where they began. That
Yeah.
blew me away.
I think we shared that quote not too long ago, either yesterday or maybe even last week, where you're talking about God's redemption story is connected to this story of migration as well. Do you want to say a little more on that, or we'll just let people dive into the study?
Well,
to,
yeah. Dive into the story, but from the very beginning, when God calls Abraham, he calls him to be on the move. And when God creates the children of Israel, he does it by calling them into the wilderness. And even Jesus flees from his life with his family as an infant. And then the church is born when there's persecution in Jerusalem and they scatter. And suddenly there's churches all over the known world. So God is clearly aware that we are people on the move, and he is using that to build his redemptive purposes in his kingdom.
Absolutely, absolutely. So you mentioned your book, which again also launched this week. And yes, there it is. Good. I'm glad you brought a copy. I haven't got mine yet, and I've got to get it through the mail. and, but how do you help us just sort of from your perspective, both how it kind of connects to what you're writing about your book, and then maybe there might be some departures as well, but sort of how have these things kind of related for you over the last, because a book you probably were writing last year and this, or maybe even 2 years ago, and then you were working on this last year, but how have those connected for you?
Yeah, I wrote Fearing Bravely during 2020. The book publishing process is long, as you know. But yeah, I've still been marinating in these ideas the whole time. So it was really meaningful to me to write this book and then the Far From Home Bible study so closely proximal to each other. And then to have them launch on the same day just felt like a really cool kind of a God thing, I guess. It was spiritually significant for me anyway. In Fearing Bravely, I am looking at all the ways that Jesus invites us to be discipled into love, a love that overcomes fear, but how so many of the messages that we hear every day are discipling us to fear. And I would say even a fear that is trying to overcome our love, that we have this sort of misplaced sense of self-preservation, that we think so many warnings, that things are so dangerous that we've just really got to, keep things tight and close to home. But meanwhile, Jesus is saying, love your neighbor the way you love yourself, and love and provide for strangers, and love even your enemies. And those aren't necessarily
Hard.
Yeah, those are those are hard things to do, and they can be scary and they can be dangerous. Um, but as I talk about in the book, Jesus knew that, Jesus was not living a comfortable, safe life at all. We know how his life ended, but it also ended in resurrection because God's love is bigger than all our fears. So I specifically unpack Jesus' teaching about loving our neighbors rather than fearing them, loving rather than fearing strangers, which I include a lot of people on the move, immigrants,
Yeah.
refugees, migrants, as well as just anyone, any other group of people that sounds maybe scary or far away. How can we have a posture of love rather than fear for people that we consider other? And then Jesus even expands this commandment and this teaching to include our enemies.
Mhm.
So I go there as well. And what I love about Jesus, I think, is that he takes this idea that we know in our heads, love your neighbor, but have such a hard time actually kind of posturing our lives around.
Yeah,
He
absolutely.
just keeps moving the boundary. This also means caring for strangers, and you know what? Actually, also even love your enemy. So there's no loophole for us. We
We
can't
need
be
a
like
loophole.
well, not those people, because any excuse or reason that we give, it falls under categories of strangers or enemies, if not neighbor. So yeah, I loved writing Fearing Bravely and Far From Home adjacent to each other. It was really meaningful to me.
That's really exciting. My daughter plays on a basketball team, and they do like a devotional before the game, and they were talking about the Good Samaritan story, and she ended up kind of like being asked to sort of summarize it for the group, and it really struck me because you never know when you're talking to your kids about Bible stories what sticks with
Mhm.
them, and she said this was his enemy, that he was caring for on the side of the road, and I was like, man, even as an adult, that's such a tough message. And so I think, you know, I like that phrase you use of moving the boundary, because I think we do
Mhm.
recognize that um, Jesus continually offers us an invitation to love
Yeah.
more broadly.
Yeah.
And um, and so often we're like, no, that's okay. That sounds like too much, too scary, something's outside my comfort zone or whatnot. And so I think it is this invitation that we don't know what we're missing. We talk a lot about invitation in Women of Welcome because it's
Yeah.
such a key piece of hospitality. And what we often find, even in relationships with um, newcomers to the US, is that people are often quicker to invite sometimes than we maybe culturally are. And so we might be invited before we have the
Mhm.
opportunity to invite. And I think there's so much for us to learn from people who are on the move.
Yeah.
And this study that you've written offers us an invitation to do that through these biblical stories of people on the move,
Mhm.
which is really a gift that the Lord just keeps inviting us to love more broadly, to
Mhm.
see more expansively of the ways God is at work in the world and through people's lives and stories. And so
Mhm.
I'm so excited for women in this community to go through this study. I'm so grateful to you for writing it and putting together that research and perspective for us. But I think, again, if you're joining us and you don't know about Women of Welcome's latest study, it's called Far From Home, Exploring Migration Stories in the Bible. It's free on our website, so you can click the bio link, go over there, get it all set up. It's really simple, come to your email. And it's 6 weeks of walking through these stories that Catherine has laid out for us, walking through both Old and New Testament stories about the ways that people on the move can illustrate to us of where God is at work.
Mhm.
What is kind of your hope that women will take away from their experience of going through the Bible study?
Well, I think what it did for me in writing it was just opening my eyes, I think, with more empathy to the actual men and women and moms and dads and grandmas and grandpas and boys and girls that lived these stories. As
Mhm.
Christians, we believe that these are real stories that actually happened to real people. But I don't know that we spend so much time saying like, well, what does it mean for me? Which is important, obviously, but I think at least I need to be reminded to kind of start by saying, what was that like for Abraham and Sarah? Like what would it feel like to be the exiles, literally dragged away from your hometown and taken to live in the enemy city after watching everything be destroyed? Like, what was that like for those people? Um, and that blows my mind when I actually realize that men and women, boys and girls, lived these stories and through it all kept placing their eyes on God, never perfectly, but always coming back to say, what is God doing here? And so I think what it impacted me writing the study is just spending the time to say, to, I guess, have empathy, to just imagine myself in their shoes. And that makes the Bible come to life for me. And so that is what I hope for the reader and the women who are going through the study, for these stories to come to life as we imagine the real, actual historical people that lived it. But then also for that empathy to be a bridge for us to maybe better connect with the people still today that are living a similar story, because as Women of Welcome does such a good job in their studies of having the going deeper section and highlighting real stories, all of these things are still happening, whether it's people in political exile like the Babylonians, or people fleeing slavery like the children of Israel in the wilderness, or Jesus and his family fleeing a destructive king. All these things are still happening today. And so I think when Mary and Joseph and Abraham and Sarah and Ruth and Naomi, they're like our friends, like we already love them. So I think when our empathy grows for their experience, we can maybe use that to connect more deeply with the people who are having such a similar life experience today. So that's what I hope.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's great. And I think, yeah, I'm just reflecting and saying they're our friends. And, I think, for those of us who have grown up in church and we've seen you on the flannel graph, like there is this like connection. And sometimes in that familiarity, we miss some of the really profound things that they were going through in those stories. Because at least for me, a lot of these stories were taught to me when I was very young. And so look through them again with adult eyes and adult experiences I find it to be so rich. And really just a powerful way both to know God better, but also to understand the world around me and people around me more deeply. Which I think is just the beauty of the Word of God. It continues to meet us where we are in our life and offer us guidance and instruction and care and all of those things going forward. So I love that that was kind of part of your hope for people, is to grow in that empathy as well. So well, I'm so delighted that our community gets to meet you, and I hope that as you're watching this video, definitely download the study, definitely check out Catherine's book. These are just great resources for you to, dive more deeply into the scriptures to learn about what's God's heart for immigrants and refugees. And so, Catherine, I'll end with one last question that we always ask everyone that we interview, which is, how would you describe Christ-like welcome? What is Christ-like welcome to you?
I think I would answer that question differently now after writing both Fearing Bravely and this Bible study. I have always kind of been anxious about words like hospitality and that kind of thing, because I am not good at cooking. I'm not good at not wearing pajamas. I am very not a superwoman in any way. So the thought of like inviting some people over for a fancy dinner just terrifies me. But what I have learned is that the kind of hospitality and the kind of welcome that God is talking about is simply just opening our lives and our hearts to the people around us. And if you
Mm.
see someone who needs a friend, be a friend. And be intentional. I think, in my neighborhood, it's really easy for me to just be a friend to the people who already like kind of look and live the same way I do. But if I just make a tiny little change to my routines, I find a whole world is here at my doorstep, and I can open my heart and sometimes my house to friendship, to people who are so different. And I have found that that kind of hospitality, that kind of welcome is at the core of the gospel and at
Mm.
the core of God's hope for the world and um, Christ's welcome of us. He came in a body as a friend. And that's how he saved us. And that, I think, is how we are invited to bring God's love and welcome and hospitality to others, um, whomever they may be, saying, uh, I need a friend and you need a friend, and you're really different from me, and I'd love to hear your story. And that has changed my life.
Oh,
And
that's
I
beautiful.
and I still don't make fancy dinners.
I was just gonna say, I love the sort of distinction that you're laying out between um, pretending to be what we think is the ideal of hospitality. And for some people, that is a genuine expression of themselves, which is totally fine.
Amazing. I adore it in others.
And but also recognizing that the meat of hospitality, if you will, is offering your true self to those around you, which is is both more accessible to us but also more intimidating. Sometimes it's easier to fake it than to truly be yourself in relationship to the people around you. But at the end of the day, it's actually easier to be yourself long term than it is to pretend to be something you're not. But I think, too often we dress up that word hospitality and associate it with home and cooking. And that can be a piece of it. And that can be a piece of hosting is definitely
Yeah.
one way to offer hospitality, but there's so many others. And I love that you framed it as friendship. That can be really beautiful. Thank you so much, Catherine, for joining us.
Yeah.
It's been great to work with you on this project and great to have you involved in our community. I'll give one last kind of plug for all of the resources. The Bible study is Far From Home. Exploring migration stories in the Bible. It's available on the Women of Welcome website for free. You can download it for individual study. We also have connect groups on our website if you are going to go through it in a small group with people you already know, or maybe you're interested in doing more of an open group where you can meet some new people in the Women of Welcome community. That is all available on our website for you to do that. And then Catherine, I'll let you tell us the title of your book and where people can get it if they are wanting to go deeper in that way as well.
Absolutely. Well, everyone, I'd be honored if you picked up a copy of Fearing Bravely, Risking Love for Our Neighbors, Strangers, and Enemies, which is a topic that is just so close to all of the good work and materials that Women of Welcome put out. It is about exploring the way we've been discipled in fear and how instead we can be discipled by God's love, specifically as it relates to our neighbors and our strangers and even our enemies, as Jesus teaches. And as Sarah said, I wrote it to be invitational and not condemning. I'm really excited about it. It came out on Tuesday, February 8th, the same day as Far From Home. So what a week it has been. But I would love to hear what you think about Fearing Bravely. You can find it wherever books are sold.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. Thank you all for joining. And thank you, Catherine. We'll talk to you later.
Thank you, everyone. Good
Bye
to meet
bye.
you.